Well, good morning. How's everybody doing? Good. Good morning, Facebook. Um, so the golf tournament was yesterday, and Douglas told me ahead of time, said, hey, I'm going to be out at the golf tournament. I'm speaking there, so make sure you plan to teach on this weekend. And by the way, I have an idea. We're in this Chasing Daylight series. We're talking about stepping into moments that we're given in life before those windows close. And so here's the talk I want to talk about. And it was a talk that I'd given before. He said, I think it's a few years back. And we began digging, and it was a talk that I gave almost 7 years ago. So it was a little way back. And when I gave this talk originally, the intention was to encourage us as a tribe about how we invest in the next generation. And so I began digging back into this teaching, though, and as I watched it, it was really amazing. I'm looking at myself on the screen, and I'm saying things like, hey, I have 2 kids. I have 4 kids now, by the way. And so I'm saying I have 2 kids. One's, at this time, one was 3 and one was a baby. And now, that 3-year-old's 10 years old, and the baby's 7 and more. And so I'm looking at all this, and in the light of what I'd asked us to do as a tribe, I'm thinking, okay, Brian, have you done this? Have I invested in my kids in the way that we talked about investing in our kids? And I'm looking around the room, and so many of you have stepped up. So many of you, I'm looking at served last service with our kids, and now you're sitting here in these seats. And so we serve our kids in our church. And but as I was looking at the talk, I'm now convinced more than ever, having done 7 years of investing in kids, but then also having done 7 years of shaping and seeing what our tribe, how our tribe is coming together as a whole. I'm completely and totally convinced that this message really isn't about just how we invest in the next generation, which I consider the now generation, by the way, but it's how we invest in each other as a tribe. And so we're going to talk today about how the investments that we make in each other matter over time. How each and everything we do matters over time. You know that when you do bad things over time, they create a bad result. For instance, eating a poor diet over time, and it can create a poor result, right? Or sowing in terrible relational habits, over time can create a terrible relational result. But likewise, sowing in good things over time, doing good things, exercising and eating well over time can produce good results. And I'm talking to people lately at Cypress on Sunday mornings and Saturday nights. I keep having conversations on the patio with folks who have decided to change the way that they eat and the way that they exercise. And I'm talking about folks in our Cypress tribe who have lost 60 pounds, who've lost 100 pounds, who've lost 150 pounds by shaping the way that they eat and the way that they exercise. And I'm looking at people who literally, if they put a picture side by side, a picture from 10 years ago and a picture today, I feel like the picture today would look 20 years younger than the picture from 10 years ago. It's nuts. It's like the rolling back time. But what's true about that is that what you do over time matters. And so the fact that these folks have been investing in their own personal health and fitness for like a year or more is making all the difference in the world about who they are today. And now this doesn't ring true for say, a week. You diet hardcore for a week and work out real hard, and then you're like, all right, I want to see results. Step on the scale, and you're like, we're usually pretty like, oh, seriously? Like, I'm not getting anywhere, right? In like a week. But when you look at the results over time, you see that what you do over time really matters. Now, I always give a quick, I'm ADD, and I love it. But in case there's anybody here who hasn't been here when I've spoken before, welcome in. I'm ADD, and I hope you can track with me. But it'll be fun. So speaking of being ADD, so I'm out in the yard Friday, and I've been doing a little bit of yard work, wrapping up in the early afternoon, and I'm walking around. It's a beautiful day, by the way. It's just, everything's been beautiful lately. There's no clouds out right now. It's amazing. Anyway, I'm walking around the side yard, heading towards the gate, and I see a big, huge puddle of water. Okay? It hasn't rained in a while. So when I see a puddle of water in the yard, and yet it hasn't rained in a while, this is not a good thing. All right, so I run out real quick to the meter, flip the little box open, clean it off and look, and the little red dial is turning. I'm like, "Ugh." So I go to the door real quick, holler in, Kristen, is there anything running inside? Toilets, washing machine, anything. Make sure all the water's turned off. She hollers back, there's nothing running. Go back out, look again. It's still turning. This means I have a water leak, right? So the puddle is somewhere between the house and the box. And that means there's a water leak in my main. It's a copper pipe. And so I start thinking, all right, I got to get some help. And I start calling people. I call friends, and then I call plumbers. Bottom line is, it's now late afternoon, and everybody who could possibly come out is going to come out late. It's going to be an additional charge, because they're coming out after hours, all that. And so I do what I do and decide I'm going to tackle that myself, And this isn't a scary story. I know, I've told scary stories. This is not like that. Don't worry about it. So I start digging. Hey, this is heroic. Actually, it ended well, but I won't go there. I dig and dig and dig in the dirt. And I'm saying like this because I started trying with a shovel, and that won't work because there's roots everywhere. So I'm really just digging with my hands and occasionally cutting off a root. And I'm digging and digging, and it's all wet. And so I've got my arm down in like mud and muck up to like right here. And none of you people came by. Usually that's when you stop by the house, is when I've got mud but you didn't. You could have caught something pretty cool. Anyway, I'm in there, and I'm digging deep, and I finally get my hand down to where I feel a flow of water coming pretty strong. It's coming out of a pipe. I'm like, all right, I found it, But I'm feeling to see like, where's the pipe exactly so I can dig around it. And I'm like, well, there's not just one. And it's really weird. And I realize, hey, wait, this pipe has roots all around it. Okay, roots damage pipes. Did you know that? I didn't know that. Now I do. Thanks for the heads up, folks. So I get this all cleaned out. All the water's gone and the mud and everything's gone and it's dry. I'm looking. You wouldn't believe this. It looks like these roots had an incredible strategy for the way that they aggressively attacked my pipe, because they are wrapped all around the thing like somebody brilliant had come up with a plan for how they could attack the pipe. I'm just telling you. And ADD me starts Googling things. I'm like, wow, roots. I'm seeing all these crazy cool pictures of things that roots do over time. Not cool, actually. Most of them are pretty bad. But they're pictures of what roots do over time. And then that somehow takes me off to what trees can do over time. And I see like a park bench that was put too close to a tree. Eventually the tree grew up and the whole tree like encompassed the park bench. So there's just like two park bench legs sticking out from like a ginormous like park bench shaped tree. I'm like, that's cool. And then a rabbit trailed somewhere off into like the Grand Canyon and the way the river like cut through that gorge, and how it carved a big huge canyon, but it's just a small river. At any rate, that's my ADD and how it goes. Hope you track that. But here's what I figured out. What happens over time really does matter, and it doesn't take a large force of anything. The large force is the time itself. The time, over time, things happen that wouldn't happen in a short period of time, but what we do over time matters. I mean, for instance, is the way that a tree near a bench could literally swallow the thing up over time, and how a small river out in the middle of a dry desert could carve like a ginormous canyon over time. It doesn't take a huge force, but it takes time. And today we're going to talk about a few things that if we do them over time, they're going to make a tremendous difference in our lives and the lives of others. We've been tracking through this Chasing Daylight series. We've been talking about how we're given these moments in life, moments that if we step into, we can make a difference in the lives of others and in our lives as well. And we talked this past week particularly about living free, about how we're literally given freedom. Jesus came to establish freedom for us, but not freedom that we would like fall back in to slavery, like that we would lose our freedom, but freedom that would keep us free. Not freedom like when you get a paycheck and now you're free to spend money, but you spend the money in such a way that now you're attached to a new monthly payment, right? But that, you're like back not free anymore. But instead that we would have our freedom, we would use our freedom in a way that serves others, not out of obligation, but out of love. That we would feel like we were free, not to take, but free to give. And we talked about how really when we find ourselves in these moments in life, and we're able to utilize the lens of love in how we see our lives and how we see the choices that are in front of us, then all of a sudden we realize there's not just a moment in front of us, but there's moments laid out for us all over the place, around every turn in life. God has placed moments there for us just to step into and to create waves and to make changes in our lives and others. And one thing in particular we talked about last week was the way that we're given a list of sort of don'ts and do's, a list of things we should not do and a list of things we should do. And these come from the Bible, but then eventually religion somehow takes over, and we end up hyper-focusing oftentimes on the list of do-nots. It's just normal. And I think that's almost humanity when we're given a list of do nots and a list of do's. If we think it's important, then we tend to be like, well, what shouldn't I be doing? I got to make sure I don't do those things. And we can so hyper-focus on the do nots that we don't do the do's. And instead, what's crazy is that the more we focus on the do nots and trying desperately hard not to do the do nots, we end up actually doing the do nots. Isn't that weird? And so instead of doing what we were supposed to do in order to become who we were supposed to become, we do what we're not supposed to do because we've hyper-focused on that list and we end up becoming who we weren't designed to become. It's wild. And so we said, listen, we need to focus on the list of do's. And so today, this part of the Chasing Daylight series is the part where I'm going to give you a list of some do's. It's just 5 things that, again, I talked about these things 7 years ago, and I think we agreed as a tribe, like, these are some things we need to do with the next generation. And so at that time, so many of you stepped up and began serving and said, I want to do these things for the next generation. I want to make a difference. And over time, I've realized this is what we need to do for each other. This is a tribe of people. And yes, the next generation is part of our tribe. And they need and deserve for us to do these things for them. To invest in them in this way, but we need and deserve for each other to invest in each other in these ways. And so we're going to rip into them. I'm going to start out first, though, with a quick story from the Bible. It's where I think I see a real clear picture of a misfire in terms of what you do as a tribe. Okay? And this is going to be in Judges chapter 2. We're going to be talking about the children of Israel, God's chosen people, the Israelites. We're going to be talking about the way that they escaped from Egypt. You may remember this story. God sends a guy named Moses to Egypt to rescue his chosen people from the hands of the Egyptians who have kept them in bondage and in slavery, right? And you've probably seen the Prince of Egypt. Moses goes in and says, let my people go. And Pharaoh says, no, let my people go. No, and then eventually God does a series of miracles, right? And there were devastating miracles in terms of, like, if you were an Egyptian, but they were the miracles that convinced Pharaoh that, okay, just take the people and go. Good grief, If you do anything else, Moses, this is just too much. I can't take it anymore. He says, take the people and go, right? And Moses goes trekking out with thousands of people through a wilderness, comes up to a body of water that he can't cross. Meanwhile, the Egyptians have decided to renege on their offer, and they're coming after the Israelites with a huge army. And so the Israelites find themselves up against a body of water that they can't cross and an army that they can't defeat, right? But then God parts the water, right? It just splits it into dry land. They walk across, and all is well. But there's stories like that over and over again where the people find that, we're out in the middle of a wilderness. There's no food. And they get desperate and they get cranky and they start complaining, but God provides food. He provides manna from heaven, bread. I think probably tastes like honeycombs, the cereal, but better. And they eat bread that was provided out of heaven. And then Moses strikes a rock and water comes out of the rock in the middle of the wilderness where there is absolutely no water. And they have water. And they drink it right there. Listen, we watch television shows where people survive for weeks in lush jungle areas where they have all kinds of incredible things to forage, right? And we are absolutely dumbfounded that they're able to survive. It's like, oh, this is crazy. But then the Israelites, these guys are out in the middle of a wilderness. There's literally nothing to forage. There's literally no water. And yet they survive for 40 years because of what God does for them. Around every turn, when they're bitten by poisonous vipers, he provides a way that they could look at a snake up on a stick and they could all be healed of the poisonous venom that's making its way through their bodies. When they need water, he provides water. When they need direction out when they don't know where in the world they're going in this desert that all looks the same and they're probably turning circles, he provides direction by way of a pillar of fire by night and a pillar of cloud by day so they can look and they can see where they're going. Over and over and over again, God provides miracle after miracle after miracle to solve their problems and to give them all that they need in the middle of this dry wasteland, okay? And so Moses gets them through this, and they're headed towards a promised land. He turns control over to a guy named Joshua. Joshua's the new leader. Joshua leads the people across a river and leads them to march around a wall of a city that God's promised. The wall falls down and the people rush in. They take the city. It's the city God's promised, and now they have their promised land, and it's everything as good as God said and better. It's incredible, and God has blessed them beyond belief, okay? That's where we pick up with this story. So this is in Judges chapter 2. I'm just going to start reading at verse 7. It says, "And the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, who had all seen the great work that the Lord had done for Israel. And Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. And they buried him within the boundaries of his inheritance in Timnath-Heres in the hill country of Ephraim, north of the mountain of Gaash." Now listen to this. "And all that generation also were gathered to their fathers, and there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel." After all that God had done, there came a generation. We're talking about the very next generation. After God had taken his people again across a body of water, through a body of water on dry land, and had marched them around a city where the walls had just miraculously fallen and the people had to surrender, and they had been given the promised land that God had told them about. That very next generation, like their kids, didn't know the Lord. Their kids didn't know the works that God had done. That's amazing, isn't it? You know how sometimes somebody will say, "Hey, tell me the best joke you've got." And in that moment you go, like usually I can remember jokes, but at this very moment I just can't remember even a single joke, you know? It's like this generation of the Israelites who had experienced all this crazy stuff, the miracles that God had done, and the coming across on dry land, and the marching around the walls, and the city being given to them. They'd experienced that, and then when their kids are like, "Tell me a story," they come up short, like, I can't think of a story. I mean, life's been just humdrum for the past 40 years or so. I can't remember anything interesting or exciting happening at all, right? And it's like they didn't tell the stories. I mean, for us, I am amazed and give God all the glory when something happens, like one of us, says, "Man, I'm just tight. I don't know how I'm going to make it to the end of the month." And then miraculously, a check comes for exactly the amount of money that we need. And we're like, yes, praise God, which is absolutely amazing and no doubt a miracle from God. I think that stuff is incredible. And yet these guys have this surviving in the wilderness for 40 years on water and bread that God gives, like being healed from bites of a deadly viper and crossing bodies of water on absolute dry ground, marching around a city wall and watching the walls fall and the people surrender. They've seen a lot of incredible things. Yet they come up short with any story to tell. And they fail to tell a story to their kids. And their kids come up not knowing God because of it, not knowing his works in their lives. It's the heritage that should have been passed on to them of the faith that got their parents through the wilderness experience. Now, they know nothing of it. And my first key thing, the first do, is tell stories. We need to tell stories. Yes, we need to tell stories to our kids, and we need to tell stories to each other. Stories give us perspective. Now, I mean, when we walk through a dark spot in life and a dry spell, like our own wilderness, and then God takes us through it, and God's faithful, and he provides a way out of it. And now we sit, again, high and dry and just bright as could be. And yet, what we oftentimes will do, because it was such a dark spot, such a hard situation, is we'll go, I don't ever want to talk about that again, ever, like it never happened. And I think in reality, God intends that we tell the story. When we dig a hole and we suffer through years and years of debt, but by the grace of God, we get out of it. God shows us a way, and we do the Financial Peace University, and we get out of that mess. But then we're like, okay, I just want to forget about the shame, and we don't tell our kids. Or we don't tell those who are around us in our tribe. And so we can go around thinking, like we often think in the middle of a dark place, man, there's no hope. Everybody always says there's light at the end of the tunnel. I don't think there's light at the end of the tunnel this time. We can go through life thinking that, but it's because we failed to tell the stories. Now, I think we should tell stories about how good God is and the hard times that we've had, but the way that he brought us through. I think we should also tell the stories that don't have their ending yet. When it's been like this. I mean, it's got hard, and it got harder, and then it got really, really hard, and that's where I'm at. We should tell that story to each other, because when we do, we'll be able to support each other properly. And we'll be able to walk through it together, and we'll be able to walk through it not alone. Heck, we tell the story, and then we find out that there's somebody in our own tribe who's right there where we are, and we think we're in this valley alone, and we're not. And then we find out there's people in our tribe who've been in this exact valley, and they literally have plotted a course out of it. They've been there, done that, and they're out of it. And they can show us the direction. They can attest to the fact that there's light at the end of the tunnel because they are now living in that light. We've got to tell the stories because the stories provide perspective. Quick story. Just before I came to Cypress, I walked through one of the hardest times of my life. I lost my dad. And it wasn't unexpected. He had been battling Alzheimer's for years. Nevertheless, it was difficult. It was hard. You know, the finality of losing your parent is just huge. Some of you in the room have experienced that. It's pretty weighty. And I'd lost loved ones before and felt like, I didn't deal with it that well. Tried to deal with it myself, tried to bottle it up and take a deep breath and just move on with life. And that never worked out for me that well. It messed with me on the inside. So I said to myself, you know what? I'm going to properly process this. And so I got everybody I could, friends and pastors, and one-on-ones. I met with each of these people. And I just told them the stories. I told them what I was thinking, what I was feeling, told them stories about Dad, all that. And so meeting in offices and around the church and at coffee shops, I shared these stories. I cried a bit. And I remember sitting across the desk from a great pastor, Russell Creel, who looked across from me and asked this question. He said, Brian, what hurts the most right now? That's a pretty poignant question for someone who's grieving, isn't it? And he said, what hurts the most? And obviously, I've lost my dad. I'm not going to have experiences with him moving forward. I can't pick up the phone and call. Those things hurt, but it was no challenge at all for me to immediately voice what hurts the most. And for me, it was that my kids wouldn't get to know my dad. Because my kids were young. One was 3, one was a baby. And now we've had 2 more kids that have never met him. They've come after he was gone, right? And that was the thing that hurt the most. That was the thing that kept me up at night. That was the thing that when tears really started flowing, that was usually the root of it, was the thought that my kids wouldn't know my dad. And Pastor Russell looked across the desk at me and he said, Brian, your kids will know your dad. And then I thought for a second, I'm in church, the whole yeah, we'll meet together one day, praise the Lord, that's great. And then he said, no. Your kids will know your dad because of the stories that you're going to tell them. It's going to be on you. You're going to have to tell the stories. But your kids are going to know your dad. And you know what that provides for my kids over time? They gain a perspective. They gain a perspective of who our family is, where our family comes from, why Dad does some of the things he does, why he loves grits so much. They get perspective. That's the point. And so we have to tell the stories, Cypress, to each other and to our kids. I have a theory as to why the Israelites failed to transfer this knowledge about God and all the great things that he's done. I think it's because they began building privacy fences around their houses and began communicating just on social media and occasionally on a text message. I'm joking. They didn't have all that technology, in case you didn't know. But we do. And that those things can kind of get in the way for us sometimes. The third thing, or the second thing is tribes. We have to be a tribe for each other. And, privacy fences, social media accounts, and quick, swift, disconnected text messages can often take away from that. As a tribe, we have to get together. We have to do some face-to-face. We have to have some actual conversations, give some actual hugs, walk through some actual life circumstances together. That's what being a tribe is all about. And so my challenge to us in that is that we have to make sure that in the age of social media, in the age of 6-foot privacy fences, that we invite people into our fences. That we have backyard patio parties, and that we get on social media and say, hey, can we meet up? Can we get together? Hey, let's talk. And instead of just posting and just posting, but that we go deep together as a tribe. The Bible gives us a few directives for how we are to interact and what we are to do as a tribe. Usually they're attached to these words, the words one another or the words each other. So if you want to know more of these, I picked out just a few. I'm going to read to us just a few of the things the Bible says we ought to do as a tribe. If you want to know more, Google real quick, scriptures, one another, or scriptures, each other, and just see what the Bible says about what we're to do for one another, with one another, and what we're to do for each other because of each other. And so look at these real quick. I'm going to read them out to you. Be at peace with each other. Love one another. Be devoted to one another and honor one another. Live in harmony with one another. Stop passing judgment on one another, but instead accept one another and instruct one another. Have equal concern for each other and serve one another. Carry each other's burdens. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Be kind and compassionate to one another. Forgive each other, encourage each other, build each other up and spur each other on. Pray for each other and offer hospitality to each other. And again, look in the Bible. All throughout the pages of Scripture, and particularly throughout the life of Christ, Jesus, he gives us examples of what we ought to do, and he came to be the example of what we ought to do among ourselves as a tribe. And you know what? When you look and you see a tribe that does these things, that's a tribe you want to be a part of. Because tribes over time provide a sense of belonging. You know, and we've all found ourselves in a place, in an office somewhere where we felt like that we just didn't belong anymore. And we've even found ourselves in places with family where we thought, gosh, I just don't belong anymore. Or in a relationship we don't belong in anymore, and yet we've been able to come into this space. We've been able to connect with our tribe and regain that sense of belonging. Yes, I do have a place where I do belong. I do have a people where I belong because I have a God to whom I belong, right? And we reflect that relationship that we have with God by the relationship that we have with each other. And Cypress, I see us do it so well. That's something I reflect on well over the past 7 years is the way that we have become a tribe together. The conversations that I hear and the huddles that I see out on the patio after services. You guys get together and you just huddle up. And now occasionally I'll see a couple out in the wing or an individual over at the side. And oftentimes I'll see somebody leave a huddle and go grab them in. But here's what I want to remind you about. A lot of times we'll say, hey, you know what? You can find a people where you can belong. You can find connections. You can build relationships. And then sometimes you look back and think, hey, I have connections. I do belong. I have relationships. And what I want to remind you is that we all came into relationship. We all found a place to belong. At some point, we didn't belong. At some point, we didn't have the relationships that we have now. But most often, it was because somebody reached a hand out and said, come in. Invited in. And so while we huddle and enjoy our conversations and laugh together and have a good time, let's also remember that for those who are just outside of our circles, many times we'll need an invitation in. Let's not be exclusive huddles. Let's be inclusive huddles, where folks who are standing in the wings are quickly invited into a conversation to laugh with us and to have a good time with us, to get to know us and to hear the stories that we're sharing, because we're a tribe. And that's what a tribe does. Now, another thing a tribe does, and I think it's as equally as important as the stories, is tribes have fun. That's another thing I love about the Cypress tribe, is that Cypress knows how to have fun. And you guys connect out on the patio, and I watch the conversations. You know, you meet somebody for the first time, and at a level, you say, hey, what do you do for a living? You know, how long have you lived in the area? And then you say, hey, it was good to meet you, and all that, and you walk away, and you've made not really a connection so much as, you know, an acquaintance. But then I noticed so many times those connections, you know, meeting for the first time go beyond what do you do for a living and how long you've been in the area, but they go to some laughter, some conversations that are funny, some jokes that are told, some ironies that we all share, and we laugh together a little bit. And it creates a sense of connection. Many times beyond that, I see Cypress invite, you know, hey, let's get together and go meet up at Barfly and listen to Taylor play, you know, and you meet up and you laugh a lot. You laugh a lot more than the few laughs on the patio, and because you laugh more, you build more of a connection, right? And then occasionally I'll talk to Meadowers, and I'm like, hey, where were you last weekend? And I'm thinking, wait, where were you last weekend? And you, where were all you guys last weekend? And they'll say, oh, we went on a cruise together. And I love that about Cypress. I mean, we don't just come in and formally do church together, sing the songs, listen to the teaching, and go out and say, thank you, brother, thank you, brother, thank you, brother, and leave, right? But instead, we actually laugh together. We have fun together on the patio. We go out to Barfly together, and then you guys get on a boat and go off on a cruise together. And people who cruise together come back with an even deeper connection And you get it. You get that fun, it creates that connection over time that we can't create just by attending a church service and sitting in rows. You love to connect and have fun. I believe it's a God thing. I believe God means that we have fun. God himself, for instance, let's talk about creation. God created the whole existence of everything we know in how many days? 6. We hear the word 7. There's a reason, because it was 7 days in creation. 6 days he created it. The 7th day, God rested. Do you think that God rested because he was utterly exhausted? Because he had expended every bit of energy he had on creating all of this wonderful stuff? He just didn't have an ounce left. He just could nothing else to give, so God just laid down and rested. You think that's why on the 7th day he rested? No, he's the all-powerful God. He can create 10 of these universes and or existence like we know today and then move on and do it all over again, and he would never get tired. I believe that he had fun on the 7th day because every time God created something, whether it was man or animal or water in the skies, God always looked at it and said it was good. And it's like me when I'm in the kitchen cooking, and I say, it smells good. You know what? It never makes it out of the kitchen without me taking a bite. In fact, I get it to the table, and Kristen's like, I thought you made more of this, right? Oops. I think God stopped on the 7th day. He enjoyed what he created because that's what he created us for. He created us for a connection. He created us to have fun with, and it's fun to God when we spend time with him. He intended that to be the way he would have fun, is us, the creation that he made. And then Jesus, I mean, for goodness sakes, he's got these 12 guys that travel around with him. And of course, they would go in and they would do this big, huge presentation in front of thousands of people, you know, and Jesus would break bread and divide fish, and he would feed everybody, and he'd heal a bunch of people. Amazing things happen, and Jesus proved to these crowds of people that he was God by the miracles that he did. But then Jesus would take his 12 friends, his 12 closest buddies, and say, hey, now let's get away. Let's get away together. And they would go have fun. Let's go across the sea. Let's go on a cruise, right? And Jesus would do all kinds of wacky stuff. I mean, because he was Jesus and he could do things me and you couldn't do. But just because he could do it, he would come walking up to his disciples on the water. They're out in a boat and he would just come walking up. And they think they see a ghost and it's Jesus because he could do that. You know what that's called? That's called fun. And when Jesus would go to his disciples and say, hey, cast your nets on the other side of the boat, and they would pull up their nets and they would have a boatload of fish. I mean, when you come in from fishing with your buddies with a boatload of fish, do you know what that's called? Fun. That's called fun. When you pull up on a beach and you set a campfire and you just camp out on a beach together, you know what that's called? That's called fun. And for goodness sakes, I can't believe that the time in Bethany was the last time that anybody asked Jesus to turn water into wine. I mean, hello, you got a best friend who can turn water into wine. You know, Jesus is like, where do you guys want to go? They're like, anywhere that's got water. You know what I mean? I think that Jesus had a lot of fun with his disciples. He means for us as a tribe to have fun together. And that's something we can't forget. You know, we can come in all stoic and say, okay, let's focus on the scriptures. And we can approach each other like, yes, you know, amen, God bless. All. Hey, listen, God meant for us to have fun. He really did. And so we can't let that go. And then number 4 is love. It's another thing I feel like Cypress is really good at. So I'm not even going to dwell on it very long. But love over time builds a sense of worth. And we all need a sense of worth. 1 Corinthians 13, 4-8 gives us a definition for love. It says it like this. Love is patient and kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It's not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It's not irritable or resentful. It's not rejoice in wrongdoing, but it rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, endures all things, and love never fails. And Cypress, just like we said last weekend, if we step into moments and we look at the choices that are before us and we ask the 2 questions that Douglas will often tell us, that, hey, when you get into these places and you have the choice to make, do this. Ask yourself, what's the loving thing to say? And what's the loving thing to do? It's a real simple way to approach things in your office when you get into a situation where, you know, work is work. It's a whole different world than church. Church is friends. Church is fun. Church is community. Church is tribe. But then the connections aren't there when you go to work, and it's like, work, that's a whole different place. And you find yourself, you know, face to face with somebody, and is this a moment? Is this one of the moments that we're talking about stepping into? No, it's a whole different world. But then you ask yourself, what's the loving thing to say, and what's the loving thing to do? And then for goodness sakes, you can't bring yourself to say it. You can't bring yourself to do it. So you choose, don't say anything at all. But the next time, push in a little deeper and say, okay, what's the loving thing to say and what's the loving thing to do? And push yourself out there. Get to where you can say the loving thing and you can do the loving thing and be the light of love in your office. Be the light of love in your neighborhood, in your family. Because Cypress, we have to reflect the love that God has loved us with. That love that endures all things, that believes all things, that bears all things, that never, ever ends, never gives up. We've got a love like that. And the last thing is this: words. The words that you speak into lives matters. The words that you speak to each other matter. I think about a case, a meadower who was in first service, actually, sitting over here. One day after I taught, he said, hey, Brian, you ever get nervous when you go up and talk? And I said, yeah, like we all get nervous when we go up and talk in front of people, you know? And he said, man, you don't look like you're nervous. In fact, you bring like a sense of calm. When you step up, I feel more calm, like you're comfortable. Dan Brown said that to me, and you know what? It's made a difference. I've actually felt more calm when I step up in front of people to speak because Mr. Dan said that I look calm and that I make him calm when I speak. But he spoke that into me. Now, I believe it. It's actually affecting how I feel when I step up here this morning. Isn't that crazy? Real quick, everybody in the room, think of something that somebody said to you when you were a child. I'm looking around the room, and I saw, like, it didn't even take a second. Like, everybody went. Some people smiled a little bit. Others went. You don't want to think about that. Isn't it wild, though, that you can still remember something that somebody said to you when you were a child? Yet if you went back to them and said, do you remember when you said this? Many of them would probably say, are you serious? I said that? I didn't even remember having said that, right? Some of you have gone to those people and said, do you remember saying this? And they said that, like, if I said that, they usually say, I'm sorry, right? And they try to apologize. I'm just saying, we remember what people say. In fact, probably most of the things that we all thought about in the room just now, we've probably acted in some way based on that. At some point, even if it's not even a very big deal. For instance, a friend once told me, Brian, you should never completely shave your face. You should always have some kind of facial hair. I've never shaved this. This little soul patch has always stayed there. And I stand in front of the mirror. I start to shave. I'm going to go clean, man. Bare. It's going to be baby, right? And then I think about my friend Carrie saying, Brian, you should never shave. You just look good with some kind of facial hair. I think about this is silly. He's probably going to watch this video and say, really? Dude, I don't even remember saying that, man. But he's a friend, and I trust him, and he said that one time, and it stuck. Now, I've had a soul patch all my life. Isn't that weird? He's probably like, dude, I didn't even mean to say that. Words matter. The words that we speak into each other's lives matter, so we need to be careful with the words that we speak. We need to speak into the next generation with words that give life, words that show love, words that uplift, and words that promote the purposes that God's placed in our lives. And we need to do the same thing with each other. Cypress Tribe, I think you guys are amazing at these things. I think there's always room for us to get even better. I think there's room for us as a tribe to reflect these to the world around us, to invite people in to be a part of our tribe, to show love to people in and outside of our tribe, to get even better at having fun together, to push into the moments together where we connect, where we grow, and where we do life together, and to tell the stories of life, of the hard times and of the good times and of the ways that God has come through for us and who he is and the character that he has towards us. And so I'm going to pray for you guys, but before I do, real quick, I can't give this talk without saying, I believe there's got to be at least a couple people in the room who, if I asked right now, you would say, yeah, I guess so. You think maybe you ought to be pouring it into the next generation? Maybe there's some in the room who could run a check-in computer for families, walking up to check their kids in on Sunday mornings, or some who could be an assistant to a teacher who's teaching our kindergarten through second grade class during first or second service, or some folks who could get in and get wild and crazy with some middle schoolers during the second service, or some folks who could come out and have some conversations that would make you blush with high schoolers on Sunday nights. But I bet there's some of you in the room who would say, it's probably time I step up and do something for the next generation, to tell stories to the next generation, to make them feel the sense of belonging as part of the tribe, to have fun with them, show them the love of God, and speak words into their life that encourage, uplift, and take root and form them. And if that's you, talk to me, talk to Douglas, any one of our staff, or stop by the check-in desk at the 412 building and tell them, hey, I think I'd want to do it. Strike while the iron's hot, right? Just right now while you're like, I guess I probably should, just do it. Just tell us, and we'll hold you to it. But we need you, Cypress. Each one of us, we need you to do this because this is part of our tribe. The next generation is part of our tribe. Well, let's pray together. God, we thank you so much for who you are and what you do in our lives. Thank you for your love. Thank you for the fun that you have designed us to have. Thank you for the tribe that you've given us here in Cypress and the stories that you are writing as we speak. God, we pray that we would be faithful to tell the stories. We'd be faithful as a tribe to give folks a sense of belonging with us. Lord, that we would be faithful to have fun together, to share love together, and to speak words over lives that bring about impact for you, for your purposes. And God, we just love you. We love you for it. In your great name we pray. Amen. Have a great week.